Follow that, as they say. I will follow Robin on one point, actually. I'm interested in keeping you all awake this afternoon, not just Amanda, actually, because you've had a hearty lunch and you sat in those comfortable leather chairs in the dark. So there's going to be some degree of interactivity. I'm going to look at the new financial landscape and how to engage employees. Wealth at Work, one of the leading providers of financial education in the workplace, and it's from that perspective that I'll be sharing our view with you. There is a photograph of me there, actually. Can you all see that photograph of me? It's my LinkedIn photograph, and Rosemary mentioned LinkedIn earlier on. I wasn't going to mention this, but there's another photograph of me later on in the presentation. Just to reassure you, I won't be showing any tattoos, or I'll be fully clothed throughout. But I have to say, looking at that photograph now, if this was Match.com, somebody would probably be a little bit disappointed. I think I need to change it, actually, my ego. Anyway. Okay. Jamie Jenkins in the panel earlier on, if you were in here, talked about the budget as theatre, and I thought that's a fabulous phrase. I've got to attribute it to him today because you were here, but it really is theatre, isn't it? And 2014, George caught us all on the hop. Rosemary talked about being emotional at the thought of not going to the pub. I got emotional while she was talking about it. I was in the pub in 2014 when I found out what was happening in the budget, and it was a seismic change in pensions. Now, one thing that's sure about this, regardless, we can speculate about flat rate of tax and all the rest of the flat rate that was talked about earlier on in the panel. The only thing that's constant about this now is change. And so we need to engage and embrace it to some degree and deal with it. So I won't dwell too much on that. But freedom and choice, needless to say, is very attractive, isn't it, really, in the sort of libertarian sense of, I'm in control of my own life, minimum intervention from the state. It's my money. I want access to it and I want to spend it. And why wouldn't you want to do that? It all sounds very laudable. But that's actually a euphemism, I think, for this, further complexity. Robin very eloquently illustrated how complicated the pension landscape is at the moment, and the people who are making decisions under the freedom and choice legislation changes are ill-equipped by and large to do so. Financial literacy in this country is incredibly low, and I'll touch on that a little bit later on. And so we do need to be concerned about that. This is me, age 5, in 1966. On the right. Actually, I didn't have a hairstyle like that until probably the late 1970s, I would have said. The fact I'm stood in front of you today, age 55, would establish one thing. I clearly didn't get enough attention as a child. But it puts me into that demographic group known as baby boomers. Now, whilst the freedom and choice pension legislation change applies to everybody, its immediate impact has been in my demographic group. I think there were statistics September 2015 from the FCA which were that over 200,000 people have actually accessed their pension since the legislation changes. 120,000 plus of those people have taken their entire fund out to the tune of £2 billion. That's huge. Now, cynically, you might think there's an incredible tax take there for the Exchequer, but the real issue there is lots of people have done that without any real guidance or advice. And again, that's a challenge. It's not just about people in the baby boomer generation. Your workforce, UK PLC workforce, as we all know, is far more diverse. It consists of Generation Y, people who were born between the mid-80s and the early 2000s, Generation X, mid-60s to mid-80s, and my demographic group post-war to the early 60s. Now, I've seen some of the Gen Y in here with hair earlier on. They have a completely different take on benefits, on the workplace, they're transient, there's lots of different issues and challenges for them that don't apply to my demographic group. So when we think about engagement, when we think about education, we have to think far more broadly. And what we did at Wealth at Work, we did a survey in 2015 with 94 employers. We asked them, those 94 employers, and they were from deliberately from some FTSE 350 companies, some large employers and some SMEs. We asked them some key questions, specifically around the accumulation stage of pension, because it's not just about people at retirement, it's about people engaging pension throughout their working lives. And these are some of the findings. Get ready for an interactive bit, anybody who's dropping off at the back there, because I can't quite see. Do you believe your employees are saving enough for their retirement? Well, 76% were confident enough to say no. 13 said they didn't know, and 11% said that they thought yes. Now, I'd probably challenge that. How do you know that? But I would say that fairly consistently, everybody you speak to would have intuitively would have a gut feeling that people aren't saving enough for retirement. And that's borne out with lots of surveys and data right across the piece. The second question we asked was this: do the majority of employees in your pension scheme use the default investment option? And overwhelmingly 94% said yes. Well, again, there's no shock there, is there really? No real surprise. And actually that's fine if those people are making a conscious choice about it. The fact of the matter we would all accept, I'm sure, is that they're probably not, actually. So what you've got is people not saving enough for retirement, not really understanding when they are saving, what they're saving it in. This is the bit where you all get involved. So this is, oh, crikey. Do you, I don't know what happened there, we're still with us. Do you provide financial education to help employees during the pension accumulation stage? Just before you vote, can I just tell you what I mean by financial education? Well, what I don't mean is, do you give them a scheme booklet or is it a PDF on a website? Do you actually engage them in an interactive and meaningful way around their pension? So if you could get that clicky thing and vote yes or no for me. Interesting. 74% don't. Okay, you interested in finding out what our survey said? 60% said yes. One thing that's consistent, regardless whether when I speak to employers, which I do a lot, whether it's an employer who's actively involved in financial education or one that's not, is there's a recognition now as never before that there's a need for it. The complexity of the pension landscape demands it. And there's been a real spike in that demand for those very good reasons. Wealth at Work have educated over 80,000 employees since 2009 in workplace seminars, and in last year alone, it was over 15,000 employees across UK PLC. Now, what that means essentially is we've captured all the demographic groups, all the socioeconomic groups across all the areas of industry. It's fairly broad brush. If you know about our client base, you'll see that is the case. So what do we glean from that? What difference has that made in the way that we build strategies with employers to make sure that the employees are engaged in a meaningful way? Rosemary talked earlier on about debt, and I'll touch on some of those areas, the distractions and the barriers, etc., that we've learned exist in the workplace, however good your benefits package is, and how you need to be aware of them and try and address them. You'd expect me at this point in the presentation to turn to Will Ferrell, the famous American comedian, for a frame of reference. So let's see what Will has to say. I almost want to do that again, actually. I like it so much. Right, so what's the point of introducing... It's not gratuitous, it might have appeared to be so. It's context. The context of engagement is really important. If we think now, we've started talking about age, and I've disclosed my age and shamed myself with a photograph of me as a child. Context is really important. Different stages of our lives, stereotypes don't always play it, but at different stages of our lives we have different priorities, and the context in which you engage people and the importance that you attribute to benefits has to reflect that context. If you talk to somebody in Generation Y under 30 who's got student debt, aspirationally is trying to buy their first property, and you start to push out communications that are around pension and it's technical and irrelevant to them seemingly, I think Rosemary said about haze, about people say, I'm too young. You know, typically that's what happens. So the context is very, very important. This is the point about debt. These are just some statistics and comments from the press. The truth is financial literacy levels in this country are low. The people don't manage money well. They don't make good use of money. And debt maintenance is a big preoccupation. Now, when we talk about stress, and again, back to Rosemary's presentation about the impact in the workplace, it's widely recognised that people who have money worries are stressed, and it will affect attendance in work, their performance in work, and the way they feel about themselves. So it's a real issue. Helping people to understand how to manage money is important, because if you don't, what it provides is a distraction to anything positive that you're trying to achieve. So you cannot have an engagement strategy that doesn't address this. The broader requirement for financial education speaks for itself, really. There are three key tenets around engaging people in the fullest sense, and there's some challenges created by these. Over lunch I was talking to some of the delegates about some of these aspects, but the three key tenets or three pillars are education, advice and implementation. I'll just explain briefly what I mean by that. Education. State Street Global Advisor Survey recently contained a measure. 30% of people surveyed said they had little or no understanding of finances or retirement planning. 30%, that's a third of people they surveyed. There's a real need for education per se out there, but there is specifically helping people to understand how their benefits relate to their personal financial situation. And once all our work is based around measuring engagement and understanding before an intervention and measuring it again afterwards and looking at the difference and then tracking that to see what difference that makes in real terms from an employer's point of view. So education is crucially important in that regard. Increasingly though, employees get to a position where they understand something, a concept, it might be pension, it might be ISA, it might be ShareSave, and feel more engaged and positive about it, but don't know what action to take next. Now that happens particularly at the retirement stage, so advice has to come into play. Mercer did a survey recently. 58% of employees surveyed said they would value an employer who provided some form of in-work advice for them. Whether that's access to it, how that's accessed is debatable, but that's a measure of increasingly how people are looking for the next step. And the implementation, how do you help people to actually take action? We've all possibly been in a position where we've understood something, wanted to take advantage of it, and life gets in the way, or we don't know what to do next, what's the next step? And that's what that illustrates, that education alone can sometimes leave people in a position where they can't take the next steps. The context piece is important, I've talked about that, and what we do is look at it from an early career, a mid-career, pre-retirement and an at-retirement segmentation process. So you will all employees are individuals, all companies have unique situations and requirements, but one of the key things that works, regardless of that, is to take the population and look at them in context and build communication and engagement strategies in context. Because what we need to do is to engage people early on in order for them to be able to make the right decisions as they earn throughout their working lives to make retirement a real possibility. It's not just altruism. Without a default retirement age, you've got no control over when people retire in the workplace. Now, it may well be fine that somebody is an older employee and they're very relevant still. It's not an ageist statement, but if you're not in control, if that individual's not in control of when they retire, you can have difficulty bringing new talent into the workplace. So that's one example of where there's a commercial imperative is in play. It's very important when looking at the workforce to look at them not just as individuals, but at the career stage that they're at, the life planning stage they're at. I promise you a case study. It's not just a case study, it's a Marks and Spencer's case study. Marks and Spencer's speaks for itself. One of our key clients, 76,000 employees in the UK. Anybody here who works in retail will know engaging retail staff logistically and with a retail infrastructure is a challenge. Marks and Spencers are an example of an employer who've made a really conscious attempt to develop an engagement strategy over time that meets the needs of very carefully selected and targeted groups within their workforce. Some examples of the work we've done with them would be the career stage or life planning seminars, which we talked about early, mid and pre-retirement. So where possible, to get people together. I think it was Rosemary again who said about face-to-face being an optimum form of engagement. It's not always possible, but where it is, it really does work. I'll let you put that on the feedback form later on from my particular session, if you like. But genuinely, this type of engagement is the optimum form. However, the retail space presents some unique challenges. We used animation to launch a share save scheme, for example, which was very well received. It increased the amount of people who subscribed to the share save scheme by 11% and their contributions by 20%. That's using technology intelligently, and what we're currently doing is working with them on the LTAA issues with 8 separate tailored webcasts. So again, it's about understanding that there's no one simple solution to this. You have to develop something that understands the workplace and it adapts and grows organically over time, actually, and is adaptable and responds to change, whether it's legislative or otherwise. Okay. Just a quick show of hands on this now. Who's got a smart device with them today? Okay. Who's used it more than once today? And who's used it while I've been presenting? Shame on you all. We all know, I mean, the urban myth that only the young use technology. We all use data on the move. LinkedIn, Facebook, things have been tweeting today, I think. Debbie's nodding. Is that right? Tweeting, Twittering? I don't know. Yeah, that's tweeting. Okay, that's great. The contentious as it may be, people are talking about robo-advice. So there's all sorts of ways technology could be used. I would argue, yes, we need to embrace that. And we need to make sure that where we can and we need to, that we use it intelligently. But it needs to be part of, in itself, it isn't a panacea. People around complex subjects, as Rosemary said, need to engage people at some point for reassurance. So it needs to be and will become increasingly part of the way that we engage people around complicated subjects in the future, but it won't be the sole way of doing it. So, maintaining engagement is key, starting to engage people early and maintaining engagement. And that needs to be something that is worked at. It isn't something that is necessarily arrived at quickly. But it is worthwhile, and as long as you measure engagement and you measure the responses efficiently, there's both an altruistic and a commercial benefit in that. So in summary then, yes, pensions legislation particularly has been complicated, and it's one aspect of engagement that needs to be addressed. But there are so many other aspects of financial well-being that need to be addressed, and financial education is a means of delivering that. It can be done in many different ways that are effective, but it's down to what are the needs of the individual employee and the needs of the individual employer. The point, I think, is have a strategy. Is understand that your workforce is unique. Your workforce has individual needs, but they also have common needs that are being seen right across the marketplace at the moment. And it's about understanding that and finding a way that works best for you in engaging the staff. Thank you.